I'm traveling back in time to play your favorite quest decks, and on the cutting board today, Hunter. Now on the surface, these quests look pretty simple. One has value, one is aggro. But when you actually take a look at the game loop of them, you'll actually find that they're quite a bit more complex. Because I mean, sure, Unseal the Vault does help you finish off your opponent, but it does generally come into play later in the game. And in the same way, yeah, sure, the March Queen does generally lean towards a more value-oriented game plan, but it also comes down on the board significantly quicker, assuming you have the mana to play it. My initial thought when playing this was probably, well, aggro is better. However, I actually found that because the deck already has so many tools to aggressively kill your opponent, the extra value provided by the other questline can actually be important more often, especially when you're facing control matchups. Now, without further ado, let's jump in the game and try these decks out. Now in general, you're gonna want to be mulliganing for generally just 1-drops or other early game cards. Shadehound being the exception to this, because being able to trigger that infuse effect early is really impactful. Now, the early game of this deck really isn't that complicated. You play your quest and then you basically try to curve out as much as possible. You do also generally want to squeeze out as much value from your weapons as possible, so I actually decided to coin into my 3-mana weapon, just so I don't end up having to waste it, because I do want to get my Leatherwork cap down as soon as possible when I actually start filling my board with minions. I also end up getting a good top deck there, which allows me to fill my curve really nicely. My start isn't necessarily ideal. I would have preferred if I would have drawn perhaps a Rats of Extraordinary Size or a Shadehound just to be able to develop some more board presence. But since he's not really pressuring me that much, I'm generally just playing slowly, and he's just giving me a lot of time to basically finish my quest, which at the end of the day is good for me. Speak of the devil, I do end up top decking a Rats of Extraordinary Size, which means that now my main focus can be to just develop a wide board and hopefully be able to play the Rats next turn. Unfortunately, he does end up clearing a pretty large part of my board, so I just end up filling my hand up again, which I think works out pretty well. I also end up getting a really good value on my board clear because of the cleave effect, which sets me up nicely to be able to continuously just flood the board next turn. Now, he wasn't able to take back the board in the early game, which allows me to not only set up my quest, but also a Shadehound, basically overkilling him, leading me into a very convincing victory in the first game. Now for the March Queen deck, the main difference is I do have put in a Hope of Quell. Now for the Now for the Mach Queen deck, the main differences I've put in a Hope of Qualtas, the new weapon that they released. It actually synergizes really well with the deck, just allowing you to get a really big value spike with the questline, as well as just buffing the board in general. Additionally, this deck also runs a lot more 1-drops, just really to complete your questline as quickly as possible, and allowing you to basically always have a good tempo start at the beginning of the game. Well, no 1-drops, that's kind of unfortunate. Surely I draw it by turn 2 though, right? Because that's when I really need it. I mean, I guess that's technically a 1-drop, I shouldn't be complaining. Oh look, another one of those, just what I needed. Well, I guess I shouldn't be expecting to always draw 1-drops, I mean they only make up a third of my deck. But that being said, this deck does generally shine against the slower, more controlly decks, because you're generally just able to continuously fill your board with more and more pressure. So let's check one of those matchups and see how it plays. Hey, I get it, I don't use my subscriptions either, okay? But if you could just check in the bottom right corner of the screen and just subscribe, I would really appreciate it. And if you're on mobile, just alt tab the video for a second and subscribe, because I would really appreciate it. I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not keeping Master's Call is a good idea. I mean, technically I would prefer to spend those 3 mana on playing minions, but end of the day it does help you to draw into your win conditions, so I decided to keep it. It's also probably good against priests in general because they tend to be more controlly, and especially against a quest priest, I really don't have to overextend on the board too much. I just need to focus on developing my win conditions and going for big plays that are difficult to remove. In this scenario, it almost didn't pay off to have the Master's Call, seeing as I did draw into my Shadehound, but imagine a scenario where I don't do that, and I think because of that, it's still a good call. As usual, I'm just looking to fill my board as much as possible, looking to get a good turn 5 with the Shadehound, where I'm able to just absolutely pummel my opponent into submission. It ended up not quite working out because it does end up playing Mass Hysteria, but that's still a really good removal piece that's just now gone to a bunch of 1/1s, so I'm definitely going to take that. I also decided to play my Alasi because remember, I'm looking to get a lot of 1/1s quickly onto the board, so even though it ends up burning me a card, and it actually ends up burning me a pretty important card, which is quite unlucky, I still think it's a good play. I do kind of misplay here because I end up getting one too many cards in my hand, which means I'm gonna overdraw again, which, obviously I wouldn't recommend, but in principle, the play was good. End up not burning something very important, but now I end up in a difficult situation because I know at least 2 of my beasts are going to die, and I'm just hoping that it's not going to be Shadehound, so I just fill my board as much as possible, and I actually end up getting pretty lucky, not noticing the taunt there, what an idiot. I end up getting pretty lucky and I don't lose my Shadehound, meaning that it stays alive until the next turn. He does end up playing it and buffing my entire board, which, not the brightest play, but I mean, not everyone knows that interaction. He does end up resurrecting the minions, which basically means I need to do the same play again, but I have another Shadehound in my deck, so I really have no problem just going for that. I get slightly less lucky this time. It ended up burning both of my 7/7s, which is kind of unfortunate. I really hoped it would have killed maybe my 1/3. Then he counters it by just absolutely tossing. I'm not sure about that play, but he decided it was a good play, so I'm just gonna, that's fine. Additionally, in retrospect, I probably should have hero powered here. Not the biggest misplay, all things considered, but still misplay nonetheless. Bit of a difficult board state once again, but I'm really just looking to set up as clean of a cleave with my minions, which is gonna allow me to clear the board pretty cleanly. My opponent does end up playing Cyrella, which just absolutely blasts my entire board. Fortunately, I do have a lot of card draw in my hand, which is gonna allow me to just basically immediately redevelop the same board I already had before. Also drawing in the hope of Keltalas? Pretty big. He ends up making a pretty weak attempt to deal with my board, so at this point I'm thinking, yeah, he probably can't deal with my board, so I'm just gonna just trade in, hit him in the face, and just refill my board. I mean, realistically, at this point, assuming he doesn't have like a handful of board clears, I'm in a really good spot. Ends up playing Moarg, which is just not going to be enough, and I am getting a really convincing victory. Now, with that being said, you might be wondering why I'm not just killing him, and why I'm BMing, which the answer is I'm not BMing. I just don't outcount, but I figured it out eventually. With that being said, make sure to like, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. With that being said, have a good day. Goodbye.